Ah, that's right, War of the Kings. Hi, welcome back to Walking Through the Word. I'm Brother Reed, and today we're looking at Genesis chapter 13. This is a story of Lot and Abram as they left Egypt and up to the point where they separated and Lot went down towards Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abram stayed up in Canaan, and God blesses Abram and gives him the land. So, Genesis chapter 13, let's get started. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev, he and his wife and all that belonged to him, and Lot with him. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver and in gold. He went on his journeys from the Negev as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar which he had made there formerly, and there Abram called on the name of the Lord. Now Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, and the land could not sustain them while they were dwelling together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to remain together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. Now the Canaanite and the Perizzite were dwelling in the land. So Abram said to Lot, "Please, let there be no strife between you and me, nor between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If to the left, then I will go to the right, or if to the right, then I will go to the left." Lot lifted up his eyes and saw the valley of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as you go to Zoar. So Lot chose for himself all the valley of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward. Thus they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the valley and moved his tents as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked exceedingly, and sinners against the Lord. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, "Now lift up your eyes, and look from the place where you are, northward, and southward, and eastward, and westward. For all the land which you see, I will give it to you and your descendants forever. I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if anyone can number the dust of the earth, then your descendants can also be numbered. Arise, walk about the land through its length and breadth, for I will give it to you." Then Abram moved his tent and came and dwelt by the oaks of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. That was the end of chapter 13, and it's pretty self-explanatory. We can tell what's going on here, that it's pretty basic. Abram left Egypt, and Lot and everything went with him, and this was right after Pharaoh had found out that Sarai was his sister, and that Abram had committed the sin, and he brought problems onto Pharaoh as a repercussion of what he did. But one thing you got to notice is that Abram and Lot kept the camels, they kept the herds, they kept their wealth. All of this was put and given to Abram because of Sarai. So as Abraham had committed this sin and had Pharaoh take his wife as Pharaoh's wife, and all these problems happened to Pharaoh, all this wealth was transferred over to Abram, and he didn't have to give the money back. He didn't have to give the camels or anything back. He wound up keeping that. And there's a proverb says, if I can remember it off the top of my head, the wealth of the wicked is stored up for the righteous, but a righteous man leaves an inheritance for his, I think it's the other way around. A righteous man leaves an inheritance for his children's children, and the wealth of the wicked is stored up for the righteous. I'm going to have to look it up. The wealth of the wicked is stored up for the righteous is the point I want to make. And it was that principle from Proverbs, that the wealth of the wicked is stored up for the righteous, that allowed Abram to keep that. Even though it came about because of his sin, that transfer of wealth was okay. It was taken. It was part of what happened, and how that played out. So he got very wealthy by pimping off his wife, and that's why I say he pimped her off. He kept the money. And so now they're out, though. They lost all their land and house, and they weren't allowed to stay there. They got evicted and exiled, actually. So now they're out. And while they're out and they're walking around, they had a lot. And they had a lot. They had a lot of stuff, and it wasn't just Abram and Lot, because each of them had servants and herdsmen that took care of their flocks and stuff. So as they went out and all this happened, they were fighting. They were fighting over their resources. They were fighting over, who was going to get their sheep to the river so that their sheep could be the ones that get to drink. And oh, that's my sheep. No, it's not. That's from my flock. And there was all these arguments and fighting that was going on, and all this strife that was happening below them. It doesn't necessarily mean that Abram and Lot were fighting, but there was just no room. There was too much. And this shows something about Abram's character, and this shows something about Lot's character, that Abram said, you choose. Abram became selfless, and Abram gave of himself. He said, you choose whatever you want. And Lot, he stopped and he looked. And when he looked around, what he saw was that valley, and he saw that it was well watered, and this is a great place, and he's going to have great fields for all his flocks. They're going to eat. They're going to do great. And the rest of the area was kind of desert if you look around in that region of the world, and it's not really as nice as the valley, right? That's the implication here. So so Lot took for himself the best, and he left the junk for Abram. And yet Abram gave Lot that opportunity to be selfless or to be selfish out of his own selflessness. And this is kind of how this works. And so Lot went, and his temporary blessing that he got from having these fields that were well watered and place to keep his flock, and he was in towards the city, and we know when you live towards the city there's a lot of advantages. You get ability to share resources more easily. You have access to other things that you're not going to have if you're out in a farm or living by yourself out in the tent out in the middle of the desert or whatever. You're going to be able to have trade and stuff like that, and so there's a lot more available to you if you live inside the city and you have these things. So Abram went out, and Lot took advantage of those things for this temporary gain, for the gain of worldly things and his own comfort. And Abram, on the other hand, went and he's there now. What is he going to do, right? And God tells him, and God comes and he blesses him because of not necessarily because of this selfless act, but it certainly didn't hurt. And we see that Abram's the one who created the selfless act, and in doing that, he did wind up getting blessed. And then the blessing came in, and God gave him all the land. And as we were talking about the genealogies, right, they get spread out, and now here it comes down narrowed again. And this is Abraham. This is when this first covenant came into being, that God was going to establish a nation and a people through Abram. So here it was narrowed down again, and through Abram, he was going to establish this covenant. He was going to do it, and there were special blessings on Abraham that were to be seen later. And if we look at this, it says that all the peoples will be blessed. If I can pull it up. So this is the part of the covenant that God gives the land of Israel to Abram and creates it as a inheritance for his people. And when it talks about verse 16, I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if anyone can number the dust of the earth, then your descendants can also be numbered. And this is not only talking about and implies that there's going to be a lot of them because there's a lot of dust, but also that scattering that came. So there's Jews everywhere in the world. There's people that were exiles that don't even know they're Jews anymore, and they have this heritage and this bloodline that leads back, that came out of the northern captivity, and we'll get into that because there was a lot of times Jews were taken into captivity, and they were made slaves in this land and slaves over there, and so this the descendants of Abraham. Of Abram got mixed in through everybody, and so now they are like the dust of the earth. They're scattered everywhere, and so trying to number them is impossible because you don't know where they are. They're everywhere, and that's part of what's contained in here. That it's talking about this future scattering of them as the dust of the earth. Okay, so that's chapter 13. There's just a couple of those little things I wanted to pull out. We do know that he just says that the men of Sodom were wicked and exceedingly. The men of Sodom were wicked exceedingly and sinners against the Lord, but it doesn't really get into too much detail. That comes in the next chapter, and we'll get right into it.